Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the July 27th regular meeting of the San Francisco Ethics Commission. I say regular meeting. It was initially contemplated that this meeting would be canceled because we usually either cancel one in July or August, but because of the need to have public input on the two items that are on tonight's agenda, we decided to go forward tonight. I will first call the roll. Commissioner Hand?
Here.
Commissioner Herr?
Here.
Commissioner Keene? Here. Commissioner Andrews and the Executive Director have been excused from tonight's meeting. Calling the first item on the, I might also tell you that so that Mr. Minardi does not have to absent himself and then come back, we're going to switch the order of the agenda items so that agenda item number 4 will be taken up first. That is the ballot measure statement, and then we will take up the agenda item number 3, which deals with the recruitment profile. So, going to agenda item 2, public comments on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Charlie Marsteller for the record. You have my email where I suggested respectfully that you might consider amending your bylaws for the purpose of having a consistent provision in the law for filings to precede all legislative and other important types of things which you do, including placing initiatives on the ballot. And that is so that the public has a clear idea why this particular measure or act was being taken. That's something you can do easily by a majority vote, and it would apply to all the areas under your administration, and it's something you do anyway as a matter of process. So I think that it would be a useful thing and a useful signal to the public that this is a matter of your bylaws and that this is your standard, so the public would have that assurance. It's a good faith gesture, I think. That's my only comment.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Turning to item number 4, discussion and possible action on future commission activities relating to its expenditure lobbyist ballot measure. You've all received, I think, hopefully the amended copy of the proposed ballot measure, which was somewhat changed from the original that was, I think, sent out when this agenda was sent out. But in any case, we also have received a memorandum from the City Attorney's Office concerning the restrictions that have to govern any ballot measure language that we place on the ballot in connection with the proposed legislation. And I will let City Attorney Andrews just summarize, and I think the copies of the memorandum that he circulated to the Commission are being made available to the public so that you will understand and get a little guidance as to sort of the restrictions and limitations on what we can and cannot say in our ballot measure statement.
Deputy City Attorney Andrew Shen,
Yes.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'll try to be brief in summarizing the memo, and my apologies to the member of the public who just got a copy. But to be at a fairly high level, let me just be brief. So certainly once the Ethics Commission has submitted a measure to the ballot, there may be many instances in which it may be able to weigh in on future steps with respect to that measure, which is discussed in the memo. The first is what we're discussing tonight, which is the submission of ballot arguments for inclusion in the voter information pamphlet. The second will be potential participation in ballot simplification committee hearings, which are currently taking place this week. The expenditure lobbyist measure will be considered by the ballot simplification committee on Friday morning. And the third is not a singular event, but probably more and more likely as we approach the November election date, and that is that members of the Ethics Commission or a representative of the Ethics Commission may ask to go speak to various entities or groups that are interested in hearing about the things on the November ballot. This could range from newspaper editorial boards, members of neighborhood political clubs, members of the San Francisco Democratic or Republican Party, for example. They may just simply invite people to speak to the Ethics Commission about the potential measure. Now, in all of these settings, and just as a general matter, our advice to the Ethics Commission and to really all city officials and staff who are involved in ballot measures heading to the voters for their consideration is that certainly they can always provide background, information, context, explanation about why the measure is appropriate, why the measure is a good idea, what the measure is intended to address. But the case law is also pretty clear that while governments can provide or play this informational role with respect to ballot measures that they're putting forth before the voters, they also can't cross the line into more explicit campaigning or election-related activity, like sending out glossy mailers, distributing ads of the sort that you would see more akin to a sort of normal, full-fledged campaign. Now, certainly, tonight's ballot argument is one piece of that, again, with the ultimate goal of providing information to the voters. And certainly I'm happy to help the Commission go through tonight's argument and also the future steps of the process.
Thank you. All right. With that, I open up discussion on the Commissioners as to the draft that you have as far as the ballot measure before us tonight. Commissioner Keene?
Yeah, I need just a little bit of guidance in regard to what we can and cannot say as commissioners in regard to the ballot and the whole election process and the reporting process. If, for example, we're contacted by a reporter and the reporter asks, what is the measure? Are we allowed to give our understanding of what the measure is?
Yes.
Okay.
You can certainly respond to requests for what is the measure trying to address and what does the measure do. Any factual information about the measures is clearly permissible.
Okay, good. Then I'm not in trouble because I did that today with a Chronicle reporter a few hours ago. And I just wanted to...
Well, I'm happy you don't have to plead the fifth.
Okay. And so in terms of just stating what's in it, what the factual background is, even how about what the debate was that we had in terms of just reporting rather than campaigning or arguing in favor of something, just giving history and how people appeared to look at it while it was being debated. I ask this mainly because I have over the years done a fair amount of TV and radio commentary just on legal matters, and I don't know whether I should keep my mouth shut or get in trouble as an ethics commissioner. What I can or can't do, and just in regard to history and other things. I understand, and I would not certainly campaign or anything like that, and I don't think it would be appropriate for any of us to do that. Right. Or engage in matters of debate, either pro or con. But what about just talking about history and talking about various things like the state of the law in the country in terms of Citizens United and what is left to us in terms of disclosure of lobbyists as opposed to any of the prohibitions on payment of money. I asked that also with my constitutional law professor's hat on, because in terms of talking to members of the public about that. Can you give me some guidance?
Yeah,
I
sure.
just don't want to. I just
Sure.
don't want to get in trouble here.
Right. So let me just say as a couple of threshold matters, and certainly I think we'll continue to touch on these points during this discussion. So the first is that, one of the things that we do recommend in the memo is in response to these inquiries that you're going to get from the public more and more often as we get to the November election. Certainly one thing that the commission may want to consider is establishing some sort of communications protocol, some sort of point person for all these inquiries. Obviously, that's up to the commission's discretion, but that's one thing you guys can think about. Second, in terms of what you can and cannot say, one, I think, placing you want to go for some guidance on that is on the third page of our memo. We provide 3 bullet points, which say that you should present factual information, you should avoid any campaign rhetoric or slogans, and you should not explicitly or expressly urge a vote one way or the other. So those are things, as you mentioned, that it seems like certainly there's a lot of other information you can provide that don't violate any of those rules. Now, in referencing what the debate was, I think certainly mentioning what the issues were before the commission, certainly there were some decisions the commission actually had to make about a specific provision of the measure. You certainly can relate or recount the pros and cons, the different sides of those issues that came up during the legislative debate here at the commission. I think that's perfectly fine. In terms of the larger context, that can be a little bit more harder to define. I guess it depends what you mean by sort of the larger debate. Certainly if you want to start talking about things like Citizens United, that is probably something that bears more on campaign finance related restrictions, as it is a Supreme Court ruling about independent expenditures and not so much about lobbying. Now, I understand that Citizens United is often a case that people want to refer to, but Citizens United, I'm not quite sure if I see the direct link between that decision, as just one example, and the measure that the commission has put forward to the voters.
Okay. I think I'm okay.
Yeah, and certainly as we go forward, I'm happy to talk to the commission or any individual members of the commission about what is or is not appropriate. It can be, admittedly, it can be a fuzzy line.
Yeah, I mentioned Citizens United only because the importance of disclosure and transparency are the only things that seem to be left of governmental regulations relating to lobbying and spending money by lobbyists after Citizens United. And so since we don't have any kind of reining in on the vast amounts of money that can be thrown at things in our public fora, disclosure would appear to be something that would the public would want to sharpen or to look at with a closer eye in terms of protection of the public in terms of what's going on out there in the election process.
Yeah, certainly that point is well taken. Obviously, after Citizens United, disclosure is very, very important in terms of campaign finance and other sort of ethics oversight. I guess the one argument that you may face in terms of invoking Citizens United is that Citizens United has become something of a boogeyman out there in terms of the issues that we deal with at the commission. And it doesn't necessarily directly relate to lobbyist regulation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other commissioner comments? Yep.
Thank you, Chair Rennie. And in light of the memo from the city attorney, I have a proposal that we use the findings that are currently in the existing ordinance and slightly modify them to serve as the ballot description. I think it's as factually complete as what has been proposed. I think it is a little bit less argumentative, and given the city attorney's advice about trying to be as objective and impartial as possible in the ballot proposal. I think this pretty much would meet the requirement. The findings I'm referring to are in section 1 on page 1, and with some slight modification. Let me premise it by saying it seems that some of the proposal actually did come from here in any event, and I think with some very minor modifications it can accomplish the purpose that is set forth for the voter information pamphlet. The minor modifications I would make relate to the start of the last sentence on page 1. The city has required this disclosure, and change that to this ballot measure seeks to protect. Again, just making it so that it is discussing what the ballot measure would do rather than what it has already done. Similarly, in section C, in the second line after the comma in decision making, I would add the ballot measure seeks to impose rather than the voters enact this ordinance to.
Which page is that on?
That's on page 2, and that's line 16.
And what change would you make there?
I would make the change after the phrase decision making.
Right.
I would put the ballot measure seeks to rather than the voters enact this ordinance to. And then finally in D, although this is a less significant change, I think, I would change on line 21 this ordinance to this ballot measure. The only other substantive difference that I could see, or maybe not the only one, but perhaps the most significant substantive difference between this and the original proposal is the dollar amount, which is not currently included in the findings, and I would have no objection to including that if other commissioners and the public felt strongly. But otherwise, I think this accurately and relatively impartially provides the message that we need.
So what you would suggest is that we adopt as a ballot measure just the language of the findings, starting on line 22 on page 1 through line 25 on page 2 with the changes that you suggested.
Correct.
Any comments?
And Chair Rennie, if I might ask the city attorney or the staff whether they have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, one thing I'm just trying to check quickly is what the word limit may be. So let me, if you could just give me a second to try to figure that out.
It seems to be roughly the same length as what's being proposed, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't see a word limit, and it does seem to be roughly the same length.
You want to make a motion in that regard?
Yes, I would move that we adopt the findings starting on page 1, lines 22 through page 2, line 25, with the amendments I proposed as the ballot measure proposal of the Ethics Commission.
Second.
Any public discussion?
Hello, Commissioners. I'm Larry Bush. The one thing that's not in this findings that Commissioner Herr has mentioned is that this proposal restores something that had existed in San Francisco law. We refer on page 2 to for many years, lobbyists have been required to file, but it doesn't say that this measure is intended to restore disclosures that had existed in San Francisco. And I think it's important for the public to see that this is a restoration rather than a new initiative. Thank you.
I'm Bob Planthold. I have a couple of points to make. First, on wording. What I heard from Commissioner Herr was this is the proposal. That is a different meaning than proposed ballot argument. I and others could take it to mean this is a substitute bit of legislation. I urge you to clarify. Again, he didn't say proposed ballot argument. It was proposal. And I'm just bringing to attention, the public needs to be clear what you're saying and doing. So now I want to get on to the question of making presentations and responding to questions about this. I'm going to cite my own experience when I was an officer. I'll jump to the end. After the election was over, and I'd done a major interview in the hall of the city attorney's office, Dennis Herrera passed by me and said, "Congratulations, Bob, you didn't fill in the blank up on the interview and on the presentations." These restrictions aren't needing to be onerous or burdensome. I urge you to designate somebody to attend ballot simplification Friday morning. I did, and I went with staff. I stood figuratively on the sidelines to answer questions about meaning. And I'm urging a commissioner go because though staff are knowledgeable and city attorneys knowledgeable, you're the folks who put this on the ballot. You would be the ones to interpret the meaning. You would be the ones to handle any questions or decisions arising in complaints that may be based on this legislation. I answered questions or offered thoughts just about the meaning of the words of ballot simplification. So I think it helpful if you can do that. As to presentations or responses to invitations to speak, here again, you're going to find if you do go, a lot of groups are disappointed. One veterans group says, well, do you want us to support it? Do you want us to vote for it? Do you favor it? They couldn't accept the fact that we had to stay neutral. I talked about what would be the effects, as we saw it, of the ethics measure on the ballot if it were implemented. Changes in various ways I would mention. So you're going to get people who want to push you. Do you want me to vote for it? Who are going to say, well, do you like it? They're going to ask all sorts of probing questions, tempting you to step over the line. I hope, again, you folks take advantage of speaking opportunities because the absence of anybody makes the voters or that group question, well, why is it important if you're not there to represent it? Silence can indicate lack of concern, lack of commitment. Attending these different groups to comment, even from a neutral standpoint, can at least inform the voters, and that's a benefit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Mark Solomon. It's been a while since I've worked on a ballot measure, but if memory serves from the 2000s, the limit is 300 words for the argument and 250 for the rebuttal. But it's been more than 10 years. That might have changed. I want to support what Mr. Bush said. This needs to be contextualized as a restoration of existing voter-passed law. To what Mr. Planthold said, you can always tell folks at wherever you go that the Commission did put this on the ballot with a supermajority, if not unanimously, and that should speak for itself as to whether people should vote for it or not without saying vote for it. Right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Charlie Marsteller, again, I would just repeat, I think, what everyone else has been saying, and that is your sanctuary as a representative of the Commission before groups, I think, would be to refer to the history, the origin and the genesis of this particular section of law, which is now coming back to the voters for restoration. So I think that answers a lot of the questions in the public's mind as to where this came from. And you can explain perhaps why it was repealed. It was repealed under simplification pursuits or whatever, but now there's a need, or if you sense of the commission that there's a need for this to come back into law. So that would be my recommendation to you, and that's probably the way I would handle it if I was a commissioner.
Thank you. Any other comment? Mr. Keene?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would ask Commissioner Herr whether or not he would accept as a friendly amendment the addition of some language to show that this was indeed a requirement that the city had until 2010, and it was changed, and we're just restoring what had been a requirement. I think that is important. That was a big part of the discussion. I think that's a big part of the impetus. It also contextualizes it to, again, steal somebody's words or use that, because when we talked about this last time, we talked about the fact that San Francisco is really an outlier by not having this type of expenditure lobbyist protection. Every other jurisdiction has it. So I think it would be good for the public to know that we're restoring something. So,
Do you have any spot in that language where we could put it? Because I think we all agree with that suggestion.
I was trying to find it, but I couldn't.
I have one.
Commissioner Herbert.
Well, and I agree, Commissioner Keene, with your suggestion, with Mr. Bush's suggestion. I would put it right before the sentence on line 17, this approach is not unique to San Francisco. So the sentence I would add, basically taken from the proposal, is this ballot measure restores the requirement of public disclosure of spending by expenditure lobbyists that existed in San Francisco until 2010.
Just one clarification. So actually, the expenditure lobbyist regulation was moved in 2009.
Then that would be better.
Yeah, so just to clarify. And would you mind repeating that sentence again, just so we make sure we get it down here?
This ballot measure restores the requirement of public disclosure of spending by, quote, expenditure lobbyists, unquote, that existed in San Francisco until 2009.
Thank you.
And then the next sentence would be, this approach is not unique to San Francisco.
Right. And in terms of following up on, and I'm not sure exactly where the commission was on this, if you want to include a mention of the explicit $2,500 threshold, I have some suggested language if you want it. But I don't know if the commission wants to include it or not.
Yeah, I'm open on that issue. If other commissioners feel strongly, I think we could include it, but I didn't feel it was essential.
Just so it's clear, what the motion is addressing is simply the language that is going to go in the voter's pamphlet insofar as the statement from the commission concerning the ballot measure.
Yes, sorry for my lack of clarity on that.
I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Before we leave this whole subject matter, however, is after discussions with the city attorney and having read his memo, I think I would be inclined to ask Mr. Minardi to be the one to represent the commission before the ballot simplification and also be the spokesperson for the commission. One, because I believe he probably has more familiarity of the ins and outs of this legislation certainly than I do. For my own position, I would be most comfortable referring anybody who asks me that he's the spokesperson, so that I don't run afoul of using words that the city attorney tells me are loaded words or words that are campaigning. I've got to say, when he first discussed this subject with me, I said, "You mean that we can't tell the voters that we're in favor of it?" And because it seemed sort of intuitive that you'd be able, seeing we put it on, we had to say we're in favor. But as I read his memo and as I read the cases, I think he's right. We can't. We are restricted from advocating for any ballot measure, even those, there's no exception for those that we put on. So my suggestion, subject to discussion here as to what other commissioners feel, is that we delegate it to the deputy director to be the spokesperson. To address the concern that it shows that the commission isn't behind it, or that we aren't enthusiastic about it because we don't attend community meetings or we don't respond to the press. I think it's sufficient to tell them that under our ethical obligation, we can. But I will open that to discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Keene.
Yeah, I'm having a lot of trouble with this. And not that I'm not going to go along with everything that you just said, and it's not the fault of anyone. I'm having a lot of trouble with just on a logical framework, just as you did, Mr. Chair, in terms of your original statement to question to Mr. Minardi. We're the Ethics Commission. We have now put forth unanimously a measure that we believe that, well, certainly by our votes, we believe that the voters of San Francisco should adopt, and that it's a salutary measure. It goes to good government, good policy, and everything else. And now it goes before the voters for consideration, and we have to not give the appearance in any way that we're pushing the measure or that we think it's a good thing, and that we not endorse it to the voters, this measure that we have originally put on. There's something terribly illogical about that whole process, which really just rubs me the wrong way. In fact, when I was first considering it, I'm not going to do this. I was thinking of challenging it. I was thinking of, in teaching the First Amendment in my constitutional law classes, I teach on the subject of unconstitutional conditions in terms of whether or not citizens can be subject to a particular unconstitutional condition when they have certain roles in society, and one of those unconstitutional conditions certainly would be that one cannot speak out as an individual vigorously in the electoral process, in the democratic give and take of a debate about what you think should be involved. I have a lot of problems with that, just on a First Amendment aspect. I'm not going to make an issue of it, but I think I'm awful tempted to. I vented enough. I just wanted to put that out there.
City Attorney Shen, am I overstating the restrictions as I feel are imposed on us in our role as ethics commissioners to comment on any ballot measure, even one that we have put on the ballot? I suppose it should be obvious to the voters that we're in favor of it because we voted for it. But as you read the cases, and your advice is we can't become advocates.
That's correct, Chair Rennie. You can't become advocates, but following up my previous responses to Commissioner Keene, you certainly can provide information. And so there's nothing in the case law that I relied on or discussed in the memo that means that you can't provide objective and impartial information. As Mr. Planthold, I believe, mentioned, when he was a commissioner, he even went to some meetings and outreach gatherings and such to speak about a potential measure as well. So you're not legally required as a commissioner not to be involved. So if you would rather have, as a spokesperson, a member of the commission, that's up to you. Obviously, that spokesperson is going to be subject to this, providing simply objective and impartial information, as would Jesse, as a staff member. So that's not different in any respect. But I think it's best, and certainly this would be, I think, the best way of abiding by the Statement of Incompatible Activities, which we talk about in the memo, is to make sure that there is an official delegation of that responsibility to a particular, potentially a combination of a member of the commission or staff member, but that it should be an official delegation. So people are not accused of being sort of rogue or going out there on their own or potentially violating some of these rules.
Mr. Keene?
Following up on that, and again, no disrespect to Mr. Minardi, Chair Rennie, I propose, and I think it would be much more appropriate if you, as chair of the committee, were the spokesperson, because of a couple of things. One, this is something important. It's the first time in 13 years that this commission has put something on the ballot. We can't go ahead and put the emphasis behind it in the political process that I think I and perhaps I think several others feel it's entitled to because we put it on the ballot. I think at least we can show that it's important enough to the public that we want our chair to be the person who is the spokesperson in regard to what this measure is all about. So I respectfully ask that you serve in that capacity, Mr. Chair, as the spokesperson for it, rather than a staff member.
Well, I appreciate the confidence or comments, but if I were going to do it, I would want to do it in conjunction with a staff member.
Well, that's fine, yeah, but I think you should.
Because I would feel necessary to defer to him on questions that might be, I would not feel comfortable answering, being certain that I'm factually accurate.
I think that'd be fine. And then you be the spokesperson with the assistance of Mr. Minardi at your side in regard to anything that comes up that you might want to ask him about.
Any other discussion?
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just, in listening to comments from members of the public, I do think it is important that commissioners be visible in terms of representing this ballot measure and representing the facts of the ballot measure, even though we can't state a position or advocate. I think that is understood that we passed it unanimously and therefore we are in favor of it. But I do think it sends an important message to the public that commissioners are involved, and if we are going to be speaking to groups, the chair and Mr. Minardi together, I think would work very well. I mean, anywhere else in the world, we would have somebody, do a communication session where we all have the same talking points and know that we're all reading from the same script to the public. But since we're not allowed to do that, unless we have a public meeting, I don't think we're going to have a public communication strategy. Not that we wouldn't value your input, of course, but I suspect that's not going to happen. So I think even though it's a burden, might be a burden for you, Chair Rennie, I think...
You gladly delegated to him.
I gladly delegated to him, yes, I do.
Well, I suppose we should put it in the form of a motion and then have public comment.
I move that Chair Rennie be delegated as a spokesperson in regard to this ballot measure, using the assistance of Mr. Minardi in that behalf.
Excuse me,
Second.
Commissioners, can I just clarify, would that also be for the BSE committee, the ballot simplification?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Any public discussion?
Hello, Commissioners. Larry Bush. I thought I would share with you some of the issues that were raised when I appeared on this issue before the Sierra Club and Spur this past week, and an interview I did with the Chronicle today. Because some of the issues that are raised are policy questions as opposed to simple factual questions about the measure. For example, why is the Commission putting this on the ballot directly instead of going to the board? That was a policy question that the Commission decided. It's not a staff issue. Why are the nonprofits not segregated by 501c3s that are serving indigent people as they do in Los Angeles, but instead it just says nonprofits without a definition? So it would include 501c4s and other kinds of nonprofits in this legislation. And if you take a look at the recent decision coming out of Wisconsin about issue advocacy nonprofits that were supporting Governor Walker's campaign, that was a campaign thing, but the relationship is pretty clear. He was directing that all of his money for issues be sent to the nonprofit so he didn't have to deal with them. But they were his donors and directed by him. The question before the court was whether or not this was a coordinated campaign issue, and the court decided it was not coordinated, that it was First Amendment right for issue advocacy. Well, the same thing can certainly be true in terms of lobbyists who do expenditure lobbying on behalf of a measure being proposed by a member of the Board of Supervisors who happens to be running for some other office. So these are issues that are beyond a staff level. I was asked whether or not this measure is being aimed at Airbnb or other issues. Of course, that's a question that you all are best able to answer for yourself. And I was also asked, how much money will the $500 registration fee raise? And how will that defray the cost that's in the measure for 500,000 plus? I don't know the answers to any of those questions. I don't think anybody in this room knows the answers to those questions off the top of their head. But those are the kind of issues that I think you will find coming to you. I'm still having appearances coming up at a number of political organizations. I'd be happy to share whatever I learned from that if it's beneficial to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just comment on that?
Yes.
In terms of the questions that were just posed as examples, I'm just wondering whether or not we couldn't have a document that would be frequently asked questions about the ballot measure. I hope that that would not appear to be advocating for the measure, but would that be legal, Mr. Shen?
Yeah, in concept, there's absolutely no problem with it. As with all this stuff, it's more about what you say than how you say it. Mm-hmm. So, certainly if we're being, again, objective and impartial and describing what the measure is, what it's about, what it would do, I think that would be okay.
Because people do have many questions that don't occur to us initially, and if we could have something on our website at the very least that people could turn to, that we ourselves as commissioners could turn to, I think that would be very useful and helpful and something that I don't think we've done in the past.
Good evening, Commissioners. Hulda Garfolo, a friend of ethics, but speaking as a San Franciscan. I just would like to say that I think it's a very wise decision to have a commissioner appear before the public and not advocate, but answer questions. One of the biggest problems that with this commission that needs to occur is to restore confidence, public confidence in you. And one of the biggest problems as a former grand juror or civil grand juror looking at ethics is that this commission has abdicated its authority to the deputy or the executive director. This is a very good first step in making the public have more confidence in this commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioners. Mark Solomon again. I think it's really important that you send a commissioner here. The Ballots Implication Committee especially is a place where you want to have a commissioner and not more staff. It's one of the most contrived, bizarre, and Byzantine operations in city government, and this really has a major impact on what the voters see. I think you all can also speak about what happened to the commission. You know, what arguments were made, who said what you heard as commissioners without going forth and saying you have to vote for this. To go ahead and say what the arguments and textures were without coming out with a direct opinion by yourself. But I think it's really important that we're trying to get to the root of how public dollars are spent to influence the public process, that commissioners who are public officers take an arm's length at making direct advocacy on a ballot measure. I understand Commissioner Keene would want to do this to make a test, but I think you can make some really bad law where future commissioners could go off and do all kinds of bad things. So I think that staff's constraints for Proposition E are the same as commissioners' constraints, that you both are bound to a higher standard of what you can and can't say. So I don't see where staff versus commissioners. I think commissioners make the connection of citizen commissioners. Where staff can live most anywhere, you guys have to be residents and voters of the city. And that's a more direct connection to the voters to go ahead and explain what the rationale was for putting this on the ballot. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
With your permission, I'd actually like to speak for just a second about the previous motion. I did look at the Municipal Elections Code, Section 575, does have a 300-word limit, and you should also be kind of prepared to think about how you're going to do the rebuttal argument if there is a anti-argument put forth, which has a 250-word limit, and usually would kind of feed off whatever that counter-argument is. But take a look at Section 575. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dr. Derek Kerr, I agree with Commissioner Hayon that a commissioner should speak about this ballot initiative. And since Chair Rennie has admitted that he's not familiar with the intricacies, why not have Commissioner Keene do it, since he is familiar with the intricacies and spent a great deal of time working on this initiative? Just sort of makes sense to me. Thank you.
Any other comment? I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It carries, and that will include, I assume, because I think there's a very short window for the rebuttal if there is an opposition, that I will be authorized to draft and approve a rebuttal.
If the commission doesn't mind, could I just follow up on the last public commenters' feedback? So I think that was very helpful. I think 575 does provide a 300-word limit. We're trying to feverishly count the words, but I actually am not sure if that's the right process. 518, 538.
We just adopted some other.
The draft's on the table, 518 for the titled one, 538 for the untitled one. Your revision is in that ballpark.
I would suggest that we can, to the extent that we have to cut it down a little bit because it exceeds the 350, we will do some editing, but keep the tone of the language that's on pages 1 and 2 of the findings. Is that all right?
Yeah. So I think if we are delegating to an individual commissioner to follow up and shorten the argument if required, we may also want to delegate to that same commissioner the responsibility of responding with a rebuttal argument, because there is a very short window.
That was what I was asking. I was saying
Right.
that I assumed that I would have the responsibility, seeing I've been delegated as a spokesperson.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Also having the responsibility of preparing a rebuttal to whatever opposition statement is made.
Understood.
Okay?
I'm absolutely fine with that. I'm not sure that was crystal clear in the motion. But if it's okay with the city attorney and it's clear enough, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think it's up to the commission. If the commission wants to formally readopt that as a motion clarifying these points, I think that's up to the commission, but...
Well, we're asking for your advice. Do we need to? We don't want, if it doesn't have to be done, it doesn't have to be done. But if it does, tell us.
As a technical matter, the executive director is the parliamentarian for the Ethics Commission. The executive director, unfortunately, is absent tonight.
Okay, well, I'm asking your advice as the city attorney representative. Do we need to do this again or not?
Out of an abundance of caution, you can recast the motion with the specifics that you wish to address, Commissioner Herr.
Why don't we make a motion to that effect?
I move that we also allow Commissioner Rennie to have discretion to shorten the ballot measure proposal and to respond to any opposition argument in the rebuttal with the help of the deputy director.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any public discussion with the amendment? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, it's carried unanimously as modified. All right, turning now to agenda item 3, and the discussion and possible action on the recruitment profile for the executive director position. Again, there has been an amended recruitment profile that I think you've all received that corrected some of the errors that have been pointed out by a number of people. And I will call for discussion on that revised draft. Commissioner Keene?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I don't have it in front of me right now, but we had a transmission from Mr. Bush and the Friends of Ethics, which pointed out some inaccuracies just in regard to, like, who is now the president of the Board of Supervisors.
That's been corrected.
Those things have been. Oh, okay. Then I'm fine.
I had an amendment to the top priorities on page 5 of the draft.
Okay.
For enforcement, I think we need to be a little more specific, and I would suggest that we say lead staff in efforts to ensure compliance with ethics laws and effectively coordinate with other agencies. I also think that we might benefit from hearing some public comment. I know we got some correspondence at a high level providing some concerns, but if the public has specific edits that they think are appropriate, it might be helpful to hear those before a motion is made.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Keene has referred to an email that Mr. Bush sent to all the commissioners setting forth some general comments and then some very specific ones as to what he believes should be included and was not included. And I will call for public comment at this time.
Thank you. I'm Larry Bush. The material that I sent to you was the product of several people, including Elena Schmidt, the past foreperson of the civil grand jury that worked on the ethics report, as well as Hulda, who was the chair of the ethics investigation of a previous civil grand jury report, as well as Rob Van Ravensway, an attorney who was on the civil grand jury, and other people who were involved in all of this. I tried my best to provide a rundown based on the organization that was in the material. But in large measure, what this announcement doesn't do is provide a real sense of what's going on in San Francisco and how the Ethics Commission fits. So that what's important about the San Francisco as a city right now is not that we have museums or the Institute for Arts, but rather that we're in a time of great change. And those changes are bringing pressure economically and have an impact on the work of this commission. When it talks about the city government, it fails to mention the role of commissions. Commissions are an important part of what the Ethics Commission deals with, and yet there's nothing in here that reflects the fact that San Francisco is unique in having such a level of citizen participation as we do with city commissions. It also does not really give the preference to enforcement that is on the same par with some of the other duties that the commission has. And enforcement has been one of the weaker areas, and when I look at what the commission is trying to do to reboot itself with a new executive director, I think that's an area that needs to be given more priority, as Commissioner Herr just said. I think that in general, the duties of the executive director are to follow the policy and priorities set by the commission. But the way this is written, it is almost as though the commission sits on the sidelines while the executive director sets the policies and sets the priorities. If it has to be anything close to that, it would have to be that they're set in consultation with the commission. But the commission should be seen as the governing body, not the executive director. I think that among the critical qualifications is a record of enforcement, since that's one of the critical things that's been missing. There's more that's in this, but those are the headlines.
All right, thank you. Any other public comment?
I'm Bob Planthold. I was appalled to see this draft. To me, it reminds me of what I did in 8th grade when I had to compile a report about the city of St. Louis, where I was born and raised. And I mean, all this geographical information makes it seem like it's a tourist promo idea. It really misses the point substantially. Any professional interested in this job would, I think, on her or his own, look up information about the city if they don't know about San Francisco already. Some of it's irrelevant, some of it's facile, some of it's very simplistic. It misses the point that you need an executive director who is thorough, who fully attends and doesn't take a lot of days off, who is going to communicate fully and thoroughly with you folks and make sure you understand what press or media inquiries come to the executive director or come to the executive director from the president of the board, from the mayor, from whoever else in city government. You may feel it's too late to totally reject this. I'm going to suggest that rather than let the timeline drive the adoption of this proposed recruitment profile, you consider rewriting it yourselves. It may be you've got to extend the timeline on decision making, but to me this document has so many limitations and flaws, you'd spend a lot more time trying to amend it, clarify it, add to it, than if you just canned it and threw it out and started on your own. I regret that whatever money was spent because this seems not worth a professional response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello again, Commissioners. Hildegard Fullo. I just wanted to say that what the Executive Director for the Ethics Commission in San Francisco needs to be someone who hasn't been tainted by the previous office of the Executive Director. Mr. St. Croix has not been a glowing example for what would be someone of a high standard. And unfortunately, as I mentioned before, this commission has abdicated its authority to such a person. It's time for a new start in San Francisco, and it wouldn't hurt to have someone who necessarily hasn't been a part of the previous administration, but someone who has a strong background in ethics, because after all, the Ethics Commission is supposed to be the top ethical agency in the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. Mark Solomon. When I first got involved in politics in the late 90s, I met a commissioner who was often drunk, a commission secretary who was often drunk, and he said, there's two kinds of commissions in this town. One's where the commission runs the department, and one's where the department runs the commission. I think we need to get a balance between those two things, where the department, the staff know who they're working for, and the commission has a productive relationship with staff. But I don't think that what we have here is going to get us that. I think Mr. St. Croix was an effort to go outside the civic culture of San Francisco, but we got the Kennedy School of Government type operation that maybe we should just put no Ivy League master's degree candidates need apply. I mean, what we've seen from the professional schools at Harvard here in San Francisco with Chu, Campos, and Wiener has been nothing but glad-handling operatives trying to go ahead and operate well in the culture without really producing anything that benefits the folks who live here. And it's the nature of corruption, those kind of networks, I believe. We want to get someone here who is not afraid to stand up to strong vested interest, that might have a litigation background, that might have some kind of a forensic analysis background and looking at investigations, that's really ready to hit the road here to make sure the laws are enforced no matter who is coming at them, no matter what tribe they're coming at, that doesn't see membership in the city family as a pass to begin with. And I'm not sure how you'd craft that kind of language to pull that person, but it's going to have someone with a record of enforcement, a record of some sort of forensics, be able to go ahead and understand what the nature of these laws are, what the records are, to make some determinations here. Because at the end of the day, the buck stops with the ED, if not you all. And we're going to have to live with this person, if it was St. Croix, for like 13 years. And it was better than the other choice, but the other choice would have been Mabel Ng, who would have been, an unmitigated disaster of corruption as she was during her time here. So it's going to be a tough grab. We have to figure out ways to craft that message using those criteria I mentioned to go ahead and get someone here that's going to, have the spine for the job. It's a tough job. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Rob Van Ravensway, and I was on civil grand jury. I think this should have a section that outlines the legal framework of the position and the commission better than what you have now, because things are kind of mashed together and outline that you're created by the charter, that you have this governmental conduct code and campaign finance code, that the Ethics Commission and the Ethics Commission staff has jobs both administering and enforcing, and then the relationship with the California laws and the FPPC, where the Ethics Commission staff is basically administering Form 700 filings on behalf of the FPPC. So and then get a sense of that the Ethics Commission itself can put things on the ballot, as you're doing now, and that many of the things within the Governmental Conduct Code were originally initiated by the voters in San Francisco in response to rather substantial abuses by elected officials in the past. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Derek Kerr again. This commission's own code of ethics calls for creating reform within the political process, but too often calls for reform have come from outsiders, public advocates, civil grand juries, especially in dealing with sunshine and whistleblower complaints. Rather than an independent creator of ethical reforms, the Ethics Commission has become an appendage of the City Attorney's Office. Your recruitment profile emphasizes enforcing ethics regulations and other legalities. And it's as if adherence to laws defines ethical conduct. That may be the case most of the time, but it ignores the need to take ethical stances that challenge the status quo. Social justice often advances because of moral courage. But your recruitment profile prioritizes remaining, quote, neutral and impartial, unquote. So while neutrality is important, it can become a mask for silent complicity. Given the tendency of government to become unresponsive, something more than neutrality is needed in an executive director. And the gravitational pull of City Hall is such that even a neutral director is going to be drawn towards the powerful and away from the public. I think that's happened in recent years. So please consider moral courage as a qualification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Charles Marsteller for the record. There are some things that have been left out of the list, which I think you best include, because I'm not sure that the candidates wouldn't be taken aback if once they got the job they found themselves in the middle of an election campaign that essentially is being sponsored by you, such as the current measure, or a official misconduct hearing, which obviously took a great deal of effort and focus by you and your predecessors. Those things are rare, but unfortunately, now that the shell of that egg has been cracked, it may be more frequent than we've seen it in the past. The other thing that I always thought was a very critical thing for this position was the maintenance of boundaries. Now, maybe I'm starting to speak like somebody who's clinically trained in psych, but boundaries have tripped up previous commissioners, not commissioners, executive directors, because it's easy in time to lose sight of exactly where you're at. And so one of your jobs as commissioner is to keep essentially heard on the boundaries being maintained by the staff, and vice versa. Everybody needs to be checking and balancing each other. But boundaries, I think, came up last time, back when Mr. St. Croix was appointed, and I would recommend that somehow that be addressed in your position requirements. It really does take a person who's able to maintain a very strong boundary and a sense of boundary. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Well, Commissioners, as was anticipated, we would take public comments, and it wasn't anticipated tonight that we would agree this is the document that's going to go out. You had delegated that to Commissioner Andrews and myself and the recruiting firm. But we've gotten the input from the public on it, and we will make some changes based upon that input. But the present anticipation is that we would like to get it out by the 1st of August with a cutoff date after Labor Day for response.
Is there some reason why we have to have that timetable?
No, except that the executive director is out as of the 27th of, I think it's the 27th of August, before our next meeting. In the ordinary course, under the past procedures, the deputy director would become the interim director pending the selection of a successor. And I think the hope was that we might be in a position to have a proposed hire by the September meeting. But if there's a sense that we need more time, certainly we can, well, I'd be happy to hear about it.
I raise it mainly because I can understand the considerations that the chair has put forth, but I'm very dissatisfied with this job description, the way it is, and the way it's been put to, and it's been put to us, I know, by a professional group, and I guess they have a formula for doing things, and it is a very unimpressive document, in my opinion, in terms of talking about what the job description is. All of the criticisms that have been raised in terms of it starting off with several paragraphs about what a wonderful tourist place San Francisco is and how much fun you can have there if you want to apply for this job. That was an immediate turnoff to me in terms of the fact that we're looking for a professional who, in regard to what the members of the public have indicated and what we know, we want someone who has a certain focus and a dedication and strength in regard to addressing some very important matters of ethics and policy in San Francisco. Someone who's something of a bulldog, I think, in regard to doing that. Things have been raised about perhaps a litigation background, maybe even an ex-prosecutor or something like that. But someone who's going to pursue these questions that should do and should come before this commission in a very intense fashion. I don't get any sense of intensity about this job out of this description. If I were someone looking through this proposal and I had just retired from someplace, saying, man, this would be a nice little sinecure to sort of fall into. Wouldn't take a lot of effort, wouldn't take a lot of problem. I think I'll apply for it. I don't think that's the message that we want to get across. I think the members of the public have told us that there's a particular person that we want to fill this job, who is going to be doing it in a very honest and a very vigorous and a very zealous way, yet at the same time is not going to be attempting to usurp the policy-making aspects of the commission, and that the commission should be the paramount body that is the face to the public and should be deciding many of the things, rather than someone whom we're going to hire as the next executive director and sit in the center of this table and have the public look at as, well, there's the guy who runs that commission. Because I think that's the way it's been looked at over the course of the last number of years, with some justification. I think we ought to rewrite this, and I'd like to take some time, maybe extend the time constraints that you're talking about, perhaps another month, and maybe several of us take some shots at helping at rewriting this, putting it in different fashion, at least emphasizing various things. rather than having this go out.
Now, before I call on you, Commissioner, you spoke with her, did you not?
I did. I had a very nice conversation with the lady about 2 days ago.
Did you express those thoughts to her?
I expressed much more vigorous thoughts to her in that phone call, which lasted quite a while than I have tonight.
Good.
Yeah. But they're not in here.
No, well, I agree with that, but I know she said she was going to speak to all the commissioners. She had not spoken to you when she presented this. I assume when I talked to her after you've spoken with her, much of your comments are going to be reflected in what we do. Now, what you're saying is you want a whole redraft and you think you need more time for it, and that's fine. Fine with me.
Oh, can I comment on that? I mean, look, I get it. This is not a perfect document. I don't disagree with the revisions that have been proposed. I'm fine with revising it, but let's be clear. This is a perfect document is not going to materially change, I think, the number and quality of candidates. I think we should improve it because I think it could change who we get by improving this. But I also don't think we should spend all our time trying to massage a perfect document at the cost of many months of time, because I do think we want a person as the best person we can get in as timely a fashion as we can. I think we've delegated this authority to the chair and the vice chair to work with the search committee to come up with the right language. We've gotten good feedback from the commissioners and the public. I think they should go ahead and try to get it out by August 1st if they can. If they need more time, they need more time. But I don't know that we're not going to meet in August. I don't know that we should hold up having to look at this and get more public comment again in late September before we get it out, and then don't even have candidates until the holidays.
Yeah, I'd like to underscore what Commissioner Herr just said. I do think that we have received some excellent feedback from the public, and we have documents that we can refer to. I think the document does have to be improved. But look, we've all been through an executive recruitment process. The job description and these pages aren't the determining factor in getting a great executive director. That will rely on the committee that is the search committee that will interview candidates and make those decisions. This can be improved. Let's get it done. We don't need to stick to a timetable per se. Give it the time that it needs, but without going overboard. It would certainly be nice to have a new executive director before the end of the year, if not sooner. So, for best possible candidate, yes, let's do what we need to do. I think it's a limited pool to begin with. Nationally, statewide, I mean, there aren't that many people in this field. So I'm sure that the word is already out among people who are professionals in this field, and if not, that this will help to get the word out. But everything's not going to be determined by the wording in this job description. I think, especially Mr. Bush's comments about describing San Francisco, I think that really needs to be corrected, because he's right. I mean, that bears an important influence in the kinds of issues, we will be dealing with in the months and years to come. So beyond that, let's do what we need to do, let's improve it, and let's move along. Let's not be tied to an absolute deadline. That's fine with me. I'm not going to tie myself to that.
I defer to the wishes of my colleagues and what's been expressed, and the fact that the chair has indicated quite clearly that the chair is cognizant of what the members of the public have said, and that does not feel itself as bound by this as any kind of gospel that has to be preached out there, and so I'll put it back in the good hands of the chair.
Let me just say that when I read this first part, the city, the government, and the Ethics Commission, in a way, although the Ethics Commission maybe was, my sense was that's probably unnecessary in a recruiting thing, because whoever is coming out here is aware of this city and what's going on and what the issues are. I mean, so that my principal focus was on what the requirements, the sort of basic requirements are that we want in our executive director. And I agree with the statements that have been made about we want somebody who's strong on enforcement, who comes from a background who, whether he's been in a prosecutor's office or whether he's been in private practice, but that I think a minimum he should be a lawyer, and he should have experience in not only managing, but in the area of enforcement, which I think is a very, very important part that we need strengthening in. But I appreciate all the comments, and I will go back to Alliance and go back to the drawing board on part of it. But I'm not disposed to spend weeks before we get it out, because once we get it out, if the people we get are no good, we'll have to start again. But there may be somebody out there, and I've heard rumors that there are people who are interested in the job, who are well qualified, and who would meet all our requirements. But until we get it out, we can't. So I will try to get it out in the next 10 to 15 days and 30 days to have people respond, and hopefully we can move from there. Commissioner Herr?
Chair, any two comments. I agree with almost everything you said. I do think, though, that this Ethics Commission, something describing the commission and how it works is helpful.
No.
And the only other thing that concerned me with what you said is I also agree it should be a lawyer if possible, but I would not make that a requirement.
All right. Public comment?
Thank you, Commissioners. Bob Dockendorf, former Commissioner. Want to go to the compensation section of your draft document. And I retired 15 years ago, and I sure as hell wouldn't have worked for this salary. And I think you need to relook at your compensation. The outline of the type of person you want, I think is good. You're restricting yourselves considerably by this range of salary. I think you really have to look at increasing the salary range considerably to broaden the appeal of who you may be able to pull in. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the comment, and I share your concerns, but unfortunately, we have been advised by HR that those are the requirements absent our having, say, some candidate who is super duper, and we can go and say, look, this man or woman would be ideal for it, but he or she wants more money, and we think we ought to be able to pay it. But our hands are tied by what the city structure allows.
Larry, do you have?
Can I? I've already been up here once. I'm sorry to be up twice, Larry Bush. But I think that what HR is doing is giving you the boilerplate template that's based on the number of employees and the budget of the department, rather than the special qualifications that are required and the duties that go with this position. And so I think that there is a lot of room for adjustment on this, not least of which is look at the cost of living in the city. If you're going to bring in somebody from outside of San Francisco and you're going to pay them $111,000, you're not going to get the kind of person that you're looking for. Even if you went to $146,000, I would dare say at Commissioner Herr or Commissioner Rennie's offices, that's not a salary that you pay for a senior attorney in your offices, is it?
Oh,
is it even for a paralegal?
I don't.
No comment.
I don't disagree with that comment.
I worked at HUD, and at HUD, I made $160,000, and I was not an attorney. And I was a spokesperson who spun people. And I was well compensated for doing it. Yeah. But on the other hand, I know what my skills were, and I know what is required as an executive director leading a staff that is on the cutting edge nationally with the things that you have. This is a commission that is unique in having the ability to put something on the ballot directly. I don't know of another commission that does that. I think that you can allow, the language of this thing says that there can be increases based on other considerations. I think it would behoove you well, as you're drafting this again now, to talk about some of the other considerations that would allow for an increase in that, whether those other considerations are 10 years of experience heading up an ethics commission someplace, or if it's a history of having written ethics laws that succeeded. There can be other conditions, but you need to start thinking about that, because if you put out this document with those kinds of numbers, I'll have my secretary apply.
Do you, Charles Marsteller again, do you absolutely need to state numbers? Do you have the option of deleting numbers and just basically say salary based on experience and credentials and, some boilerplate thereof? And I wouldn't start at those numbers. I don't think you'll invite applicants. I would try to fudge by not putting numbers in at all.
That's called bait and switch.
We are the Ethics Commission.
Yeah.
And then, no, you'll see the candidate come in, and then you rate accordingly. And I think at that time, HR will come along. But I don't think that you want to start at this. It's a weak negotiating position. You guys should know that.
Any other comments? All right. There being no other agenda items, I hear a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
God. We've got a lot of